everyone, and welcome to Poetry Africa 2025. This is the online program. My name is Tanya Evanson. I'm a poet, novelist, multimedia artist. And today I have the honor of opening up a space between poets from Turtle Island, Canada, and South Africa. This is a Canada-South Africa dialogue. So with us today, we have Kaie Kellough from Canada, Canisia Lubrin, also Canada, Lebo Mashile from South Africa, and Siphokazi Jonas as well from South Africa. I'm going to very quickly read their extensive bios so that any poets or artists who are watching this can know what's possible. And so let's start with Siphokazi Jonas, a multi-award-winning poet, playwright, actor, and producer based in Cape Town, South Africa. She holds an MA in English Lit and an undergraduate degree in drama and English. Her awards include a South African Film and Television Award for Best Short Film, Most Innovative Young Artist Western Cape Cultural Affairs Award, and 100 Sunday World Unsung Heroes. Her most recent stage production, #We Are Dying Here, was adapted into an award-winning poetry short film screened at numerous international film festivals. And you can check her out online at siphokazijonas.com. Now we have Lebo Mashile, a South African poet, playwright, performer, recording artist, and activist whose work has defined the landscape of contemporary poetry in her country for over 2 decades. Born in the US to exiled South African parents and raised in Johannesburg, Mashile's artistry bridges continents and histories, blending lyricism with fierce social commentary. She's the author of the award-winning collection In a Ribbon of Rhythm and Flying Above the Sky, and the creator of acclaimed stage works such as Venus versus Modernity. Her voice has graced books, plays, music, film, and television, consistently amplifying feminist and Pan-African narratives. Honored with numerous awards, Mashile continues to expand the boundaries of spoken word, most recently through large-scale performances that fuse poetry with music, visuals, and technology. You can also check her out online at lebomashile.com. And poets from Canada, Kaie Kellough, a novelist, poet, and sound performer. His work emerges at a crossroads of social engagement and formal experiment. From Western Canada, he lives in Georgiaga, Montreal, and has roots in Guyana, South America, even though now Kaie is not quite in Montreal, but right next door. Maybe he'll tell us about that later. His books include Dominoes at the Crossroads from 2020, Magnetic Equator, and Accordéon. Kaie's writing has been awarded the Griffin Poetry Prize and the QWF Hugh McClellan Prize for Fiction. It has been listed for the Scotiabank Giller Prize, the Grand Prix du Livre de Montréal, the Amazon Walrus Foundation First Novel Award, the Relit Award, and the QWF A.M. Klein Prize for Poetry. Kaie's vocal performance, recorded audio, and electronic narrative explore migration and the suspension of arrival. Since 2011, he has created mixed media compositions with sax player and synthesist Jason Sharp. Kaie's work has traveled internationally, notably to festivals in the UK, Australia, Asia, the Caribbean, and continental Europe. He continues to craft new passages. You can check him out at kaie.ca. And finally, I've been given a shorter bio to share with you, unfortunately, but know that this person's work is also extensive. So, St. Lucian Canisia Lubrin is a writer, editor, professor, and the author of Code Noir, The Dysgraphist, and Voodoo Hypothesis, and also, just recently, The World After Rain. Her honors include a 2021 Wyndham Campbell Prize, O.C. Mboka's Prize for Caribbean Literature, Griffin Poetry Prize, Derek Walcott Prize, and Carol Shields Prize for Fiction. She lives in Whitby. Whew, wow, give thanks. Is it? Wow, it's so wonderful. Whew, poets. Okay, I just, yeah. It's not that winter's coming, it's just, this virtual company just was not so virtual for a moment there. It got hot. So I'm going to stop talking now because I'd love to listen to what you all have to say, and I have some questions. So I'm going to start with this first question. I'm throwing it out there to anyone who feels it. I'd love to hear about a project that you recently completed, published, performed, or presented, and something maybe unexpected that came out of it, some unexpected incident or event that came out of a recent project that you've done, or maybe something surprising. And also just brag a little bit. Tell us what you're up to.
Okay, I can take that.
Thank you, because I was going to have to play teacher. I didn't want to do that.
Sure. I don't know what constitutes recent, but I'll go within the last couple of years, right? And Tanya, we're in a band together, a nine-piece band, and we put out a record. The band's called Fear. We put out a record a couple of years ago, and then last year around this time, maybe in November, actually, we were in the Netherlands in Utrecht performing at this incredible festival called the Guess Who, which it featured like artists from African and Arab diasporas working in a variety of different musical forms. It was really a remarkable festival, exceptionally well organized, fantastic venues, great sound, really well attended. And we played, like, the record itself is one piece, it's one 44-minute composition. And we played a version of it that had mistakes, but it was the first time that I think we played it with almost like the ideal combination of aggression and control, right? So it was just highest intensity, loudest, roughest version of it, but at the same time, the most carefully controlled. So we were right on the edge. And it felt incredible. So I guess my moment is one more of sensation than anything else, right?
I feel like I could actually segue right here from what Kaie is saying, because I recently released the audiobook version of my poetry collection, which is my debut poetry collection. And when we're launching the audiobook, I conceptualized it as a stage performance. And again, I'm thinking about first, those moments where you release your training to an extent. So my theater training, so putting that aside as a way to celebrate the more improvisational, organic way of storytelling, traditional storytelling that I picked up from my mom, from my grandmother, the women that tell me within my culture. And so it was the first time really as a stage performer, I would say, where the motivation wasn't really thinking about, okay, characterization, thinking about blocking even on stage, but feeling, and really just allowing myself to just go to wherever the feeling was leading me in the moment, which means the stage became a playground. And I'm really excited at the possibility of continuing that and seeing how each performance would be different. And what it means to sort of perform an audiobook live, because we're working with the composer, the soundscape designer, and an instrumentalist on stage at the same time. So that was a very exciting experience of letting go. And yeah, it was, I cried. I cried quite a few times on stage. So that was quite beautiful and liberating for me.
It's
Maybe,
interesting. Oh, do you want to go in, Canisia?
yeah,
Okay, we're listening.
unless you have a segue. No? Okay. Yeah. So um I was just thinking as Kai was talking that sounds like rock and roll. Whatever was going on there at that place. Um, but my forthcoming book of poetry, it'll be out next month. Um, I was working very recently with Torkwase Dyson on a kind of multimedia um, portion, let's say, for the launch. And that's completely unexpected. I did not foresee that there would be a multimedia component to the book, but it is a book-length elegy that works through themes of, time, loss, love, and what I cycle through in the book, this idea of the astonishment of a life. And so there's a video that will be part of the launch, which will include a soundscape. and and the plan is to also have a live reading alongside it. So that was very interesting happening with that work.
Thank you so much, Canisia. This is new for you to work with multimedia, right?
I think so, maybe, but also maybe not, because my my commitments and obsessions are multiple. But I have had many convergences in the past. It's just not been an explicit part of my practice, or at least I wouldn't admit it, So yeah.
Lebo, did you have something to share too?
Yeah, and I can totally relate to having multiple commitments and obsessions. I guess what made me think of this is listening to Kaie and also to Siphokazi. I'm experiencing uh, a phase in my life and in my career where other people are interpreting my work. Um, and so I've worked on 3 productions in the last couple of years. Um, and one was staged recently at the University of Johannesburg, restaged, called Revolution of Words, based on grade 11 set works, but really a conversation between the South African canon and contemporary poetry, the shifts that have happened in contemporary poetry, particularly post-apartheid, looking at how these 2 worlds of poetry kind of diverge and come together, and how poetry is used as a tool of struggle, resistance, expression, identity formation. It was staged for the first time last year, but a new cast staged it this year, and a new director, completely different interpretation, completely different visual language, the whole thing. And it was so exciting because it was exciting to see how another director approached it, but also to see that the text holds, to see that, it's one thing for it's one thing for the director of the first instance and the production team of the first instance to make it, and especially if you're part of the making of it, then, you have a thing. But when you can take a script and give it to somebody else who's never seen it before, and they can stage it, and they can make that world come alive in another way, it means that the world itself holds. So I'm finding it quite exciting and nerve-wracking and daunting to have other people's hands and bodies and minds grappling with my work. And it's really interesting to see, it's interesting to experience my own text as a spectator, and it's crazy because sometimes it really does feel like the very first time. I mean, there's a piece that I worked on 3 years ago with Alexandra Sotan that was staged in Belgium. I haven't experienced it because I haven't had the opportunity to travel. It's being restaged again. I'm experiencing it virtually through videos and stuff. And just to see how she's taken this text and stretched it through dance and visuals, and it's mind-blowing what you can do with words.
Wow, thank you so much for sharing that. It's really interesting, this notion of being a spectator of your own work, especially if your work comes from like a personal place or if it comes from some broader social issues. And you're bringing those things together in your work in your way, and then somebody else might have a different approach. Kaie, I don't know if you would want to talk about this, but you had a very different experience of something similar. I don't know if you want to open that can of seeing your own work staged, or maybe not, but someone else
Not
taking your work.
avoiding seeing it staged. Yeah, yeah. And yeah, let's just leave. Well, avoiding seeing it staged. I do kind of have a horror of I feel that I'm really if other entities want to take my work and do something with it, I encourage that, and I would encourage people to um, take it, cut it up, reshape it, adapt it, mash it up, manipulate it, do what you have to do. Um, I wouldn't impose a requirement to stick aggressively to the script, although there are some themes that might be inviolate, right? That have to be respected and have to be observed. But I do find myself very, very hesitant to experience what happens with it afterward. Um, And so some of my work was adapted as a play recently, and I haven't seen it.
I'm sorry if I open that can. It's just because I know you and I know that happened, and it's interesting that the opposite can also be true.
Can I ask why? Sorry.
Yeah, I mean, that's why is always a good question. Because it's difficult to separate yourself from the work. But then at that point, the work, I feel it belongs to somebody else, and it's somebody else's interpretation. And if I don't like it, right, or if I'm in the moment, if even whether I like it or not in the overall analysis, in the moment, I'm not necessarily going to know whether I like it or not, because I'm going to have to process it and really scrutinize it, right, and be critical of it. So, but my experience of it is irrelevant to what the work is. And so I don't want that to intrude upon what the interpreter has done, right? And I don't want my approval of the work to be hanging in the balance after I've seen it, and them to be waiting for that and expecting it, because I would find that it's very hard to give in the moment or even afterwards, right? So that's really what it is.
Thank you for sharing that, Kaie. I wasn't sure if you wanted to talk about it, but I thought it was an interesting notion. I haven't had any work staged, but just the fact that you are poets who have had work staged, and playwrights as well. I'm not sure, Lebo, if your piece was originally theater or if it was poetry that was adapted, but Kaie's was fiction that was adapted for the stage, right? Yeah. So, and yeah, you can be of two minds about it. I know that I've had poetry studied in universities, and then I saw online people were talking about it, and it was completely not what I had intended. And I thought, oh my God, I failed as a poet. I failed. Like I just, so I didn't want to, but then I thought, well, rejection is useful. So this is my next question for you is rejection. No, when someone tells you no, is that has that ever been particularly have you had a moment in your life when you were rejected and you had to kind of pivot and go in a different direction and something even better came around? Has that ever happened? Is that a too much of a an esoteric question? Tell me about your latest experience with the word no.
Well, I mean, rejection happens a lot. It happens a lot, I think, especially if you just take the shot and you try things. And sometimes rejection is silence. If you're applying for a grant, for example, and you just never hear back. There was a children's storytelling project that I'd applied for, didn't hear back. And so I assumed it felt very safe to take that as a no, but it pushed me to then conceptualize how to do it myself and how to be really prudent around the economics of creating that project. And now it's actually turned into me writing. So I thought it would be this character that I created, and I'd be telling children's stories, reading other authors. And then I was told, okay, but there's copyright issues around that. If you post, if you read books, people's books, and then put that online. And it led to me writing my own book, which is this current manuscript that I'm busy with, is actually writing my first children's book. So that no, where I was looking for funding to be able to create this project, turned into me figuring out how to make the project myself. And then when I was pitching to a publisher that I'd like to read some of the books, I said, there are copyright issues. And they said, but there wouldn't be any copyright issues if you read your own books. How about you write? I was like, oh. So yeah, so now I'm working on a children's book adaptation of my poetry collection. So yeah, that no turned into something beautiful. It doesn't always turn out like that though.
Do you think that poets should be, oh, sorry, Canisia, do you want to say it? Do you want to speak?
Oh, no, please go ahead.
No, I'm here to facilitate your speaking, but if you're speaking, I'm not speaking.
I'm so interested to hear what the follow-up is to
follow
what?
up on. All right, so I'm working on the manuscript. The publisher accepted it, and my pitch for a series. And so this book, in the book, there's a story that I've written which is based on the traditional form of isiXhosa storytelling called Insomi, sort of fantastical form of storytelling. And so I'm turning that story, adapting it into an adventure series for age 9 to 12, which will be a way of getting them to dig into that traditional form of storytelling in particular.
Fantastic. Well, no, I mean, no, that I don't know. It's just more language to me, you know. It's like, and I've never really staked my own commitments on whether or not there's a radius of acceptance around it. If that makes any sense. I write with a certain question toward wonderment, and the question is always pointed at me. It's a question for me to answer. Why does this thing need to be in the world? And sometimes you put the thing on the page and it stays in a drawer or, on a pile in the corner, and no other soul gets to read it. But I think there's something to the act of making the work that is itself full of possibility, although there might not be a legible place for that possibility to land in the moment that it does. But so for me, there were 4 straight years of no's before anything I wrote was published, and if I had taken that as some kind of thesis, I would not have carried on, you know?
So another side is ignore the no. Go past the no. There is no no, which of course as a double would be a yes. So well, it also goes to speak to the why you write. Do you write from a personal place or a more political place, and how do you bring those things together? And what is the responsibility of the poet today?
Good question. Lebo.
I want to speak to, I'm still on the no, but maybe I can segue into the why as well. Rejection is a constant part of my work and my world. I've been a working artist practically my entire adult life. So, auditioning and not getting the part, pitching and not getting it, applying and not getting it, getting an inquiry and sending a quote and it doesn't turn into a booking. Sometimes a project will even, like, it'll grow legs even, and then part of the way, the third of the way through, things fall apart. It can be disheartening, it can be heartbreaking, it can be, I mean, and there are different kinds of no's, right? There's when you audition, you learn that the reasons why you don't get chosen for the part often don't have anything to do with your ability and skill and competence as an actor, as an artist. Sometimes it's because the person that they've cast opposite you is tall and I'm short, and we're not going to fit in the frame together. How are we going to do how they're going to do the scenes with the two of us looking at each other in the eyes? Like, sometimes it's basic stuff that you have absolutely no control over. Sometimes it's things where I have 1000% control over and I'm absolutely at fault, getting caught up in life stuff and missing deadlines, and then and losing a job for that reason, right? So I think there's so much, there is quite a lot of, and let me not say so much, but there are the ways in which we are affirmed as artists. I get up and I perform and everybody tells me what a wonderful job I do. I do submit work and people love it and they say that, oh, I was crying. So we're constantly having I feel like there's this dance between, having your ego stroked and people tell you how much they love you, and then having your ass handed to you and people making you feel like you're absolutely nothing. And somewhere in between the two is the life of the artist. And I think it kind of teaches you, well, what it's helped me to do is to let go of my need for approval and to let go of my need for control and to try to trust in the ebb and in the flow, to trust that the things that are meant to come back will somehow come back, even if they come back in a different way, or what is being denied to me is being denied for a particular reason. It's challenging, it's hard to be esoteric and philosophical when you've got kids and you have to pay bills, then it's rough being broke. But even in those seasons, there are things that I've been taught that I wouldn't have learned without that experience. There's work that comes out in the dry season. There's creativity that comes out. There's stories that are written. There's support that is provided that I wouldn't reach out for or ask for if I was in a position where I was able to completely be independent and take care of myself. So I think the rejection is it's humbling. It sucks at times, but I think it's really counterbalanced by the fact that we do work that opens up all these portals to magic that a lot of people don't get to experience. So I think the no's kind of keep your feet on the ground.
I like a lot of things you just said, especially talking about that one doesn't create art out of a desire for acceptance, right? I like that very much. But I also think of, when we talk about rejection, I also think of rejection as there are social structures of rejection, of isolation, of erasure, of distancing that maybe, I mean, it's one thing to talk about the no that comes from when you submit your work to a publisher and they don't accept it, right? Like that's an artistic no. But they're also kind of social and structural, institutional no's that I think sometimes one's being as an artist and the type of work a person creates responds to and speaks back to. I don't think that for me, in my case, that wouldn't be the entirety necessarily of my practice, but it's a big part of it as well, is understanding that there are broader societal types of rejection and speaking back to those, responding to those, rejecting them, So as Tanya, as you move into the next question, and you asked about the politics of art, I think that is a way maybe of making the link there and touching into the idea of the politics of art.
Carry on.
Oh, that's where I've arrived. The end. Over to you, anybody.
Would any of you like to speak a little bit about what your work is inspired by? What concepts, notions, ideas you come from, whether they're personal or sociopolitical? Nobody wants this question. You don't want to talk about their work, or sorry, this was just silence before this.
Contemplation. It depends. It really depends. I think both, but I find that even when I write about the personal, it does lead to the socio-political in some way or another. It's really hard not to, as a Black artist in South Africa, because we're just absolutely mired in the very complicated politics. I'm actually thinking of a poem that I think may speak to this. It's relatively short, where I think those two things intersect, and I'd love to read it for you from Weeping Becomes a River. And it's called First Baptism. I envy my boy cousins who return from the mountain with spectacle as men, in a new costume and name, The first baptism into womanhood is unceremonious and cannot be rehearsed. My cousin, sister, and I were not prepared to look back and find our childhood drowned on a scalding Thursday afternoon when we joined her brother to cool ourselves in a cattle trough. Toes scrambling for the slimy bottom, flat-chested and barely afloat. The cows whose water we had disturbed could not distinguish between girl or boy. Only three forms emerging smeared with mud, okwembola cracking in the sun. The three of us beaten for delaying our return to the homestead from Esutwini and swimming in infected waters. Her brother will leave for the mountain and return to ululation. But girls are sent into the wilderness with warnings of unseen shepherds in heat, whose eyes tend to both cattle and our bodies. Our mothers baptizing us in the name of their wounds and other hand-me-downs. We emerge from the watery grave, eyes opened, and we cross our legs when we sit. I remember when I was working on this poem, it was actually just kind of a fond memory of exactly what had happened, where we'd been coming from taking food to my cousin who was in the mountain. So because having gone through the process of circumcision to become a man, and that wasn't unintentional, but yeah, it was my own politics. But yeah, so I was writing about it, and I was actually thinking about why we would have done that as kids. I mean, we didn't have access. There was no river, so we're just swimming in a cattle trough. And I was thinking, that is so gross. That was actually my starting point. I was like, that was so gross of us, and no wonder we came back all covered with like cows drink there, and we decided that's where we're gonna cool off because it's hot. We weren't there about consequences. And when we got home, our mothers literally just passed around, just everyone was getting a beating, taking their turn because we were in so much trouble, and especially as the girls. And so what the framing of thinking about our place in the world and what it meant, that their concern was we weren't safe as young women in the same way that my cousin as the boy would be fine. So yeah, so it started from just something, just this very small memory, and it turned into that intersection happened. So that's what I'm saying, it really depends. And the path to get there often varies a lot.
So it's like the poem kind of opens up a window so that we can see those items that are very personal storytelling, but also the meaning of that story from a broader sense. I guess the reason I also asked that question was, unless someone else wants to jump in, please, if you feel, please jump in, is that the theme for Poetry Africa this year is architecture of social justice. So it's kind of inviting poets, and there's something like 70 poets as part of this festival this year, inviting poets to present work that is around this theme or that features this theme. But then, of course, when is this theme ever absent, technically, from the work? But anyway, I wanted to ask you, how are you as a poet an architect of social justice? or do you consider yourself that? Do you consider your work part of this kind of notion of, does it express ideas of social justice, or just open a window so the reader makes their own, has their own ideas, or do you present specific ideas? I don't know, what does it entail, architecture of social justice? I wanted to know what your thoughts were on that in your own work.
So maybe I can go here. And I think maybe there's a very clear connection between the previous question and this one. But I've never found the idea of silos to be particularly interesting or even viable for poetry. Because poetry is the kind of material that is, quite vastly interested in all forms and all registers of language. And so language being the medium almost through which the entire experience of poetry is hinged upon. And so I don't find the silo between the political or social and the personal to be even a true one. So I think I'm interested in ideas and what is at the root of ideas and what the broader implications of those ideas are. And so I might need language that is both personal and social and political and economic and theological and etc. To be able to bridge something that approximates a true expression, or that even finds a true expression. And so I think all of us taken together in the various positions that we occupy is where the architecture is. So it's not like one poet forwarding, in a kind of popish manner, an anointing of an architecture or a set of answers. What I really love about poetry is the way it allows us to inhabit certain questions, and the kinds of revelations that we can arrive at through that kind of questioning. Um, and I was talking earlier um, with someone and saying that I think the poet today, um, given how wounded and distorted the world is, I feel as though our task, and if perhaps I might just say that for me, the task is to dive into the detritus and the chaos of all of that catastrophe, both of perception and narrative, and all of the things that create these illusions that people find themselves trapped in, such that something like a genocide is not viewed in the way that it is somehow. That we sort of dive in and cull from all of that detritus the true thing. We try to rescue through really intense and close attention what the true thing is from all of the distortions. And I believe that's the kind of architecture that poets are inside of these days. We're not the economists and the legislators, and no one is paying attention to us in those terms. you know but we're here in the annals of language trying to, I don't know, find what the true thing is in the terrible distortions that surround us.
I love that. I love finding the true thing. Oh, because that's the eternal. And that's the part that survives through the carnage. There's a First Peoples Canadian influencer who I follow. I can't remember her name right now, but she's an amazing content creator. She speaks about psychology and spirituality. And she put up a post, and I've been seeing echoes of this across, multiple creators. But she said it so beautifully that we are she was starting from the point of how people love horror movies and catastrophe movies, and how it's like that genre is exploding with everything that we is going on in the world. And she was saying that horror movies and these movies that celebrate impending doom and apocalypse, it's a very white thing. The idea that the apocalypse is impending, that it's still coming. She was saying for Black and brown and indigenous people, our apocalypse has already happened. Our dark age has been the last 500 years, is slavery and colonialism and genocide and poverty and being, ripped off of your land and having your language and your culture taken away. We've been through the darkest of the dark, so I thought that was really interesting because it explodes notions of time, which is not to say that there aren't active acts of horror, enduring horror that are taking place on the planet right now in Gaza or in Congo or in Sudan or in Deep Sloot, but I think from this position in history right now, we're also at a critical point, I think, where we have access to tools that previous generations didn't have. I mean, I think when we talk about how the truth survives in the carnage, right? Poetry is a human function. Poetry doesn't just live in books and in the academy. Poetry is always mutating. It's always doing what it has to do. People were writing rhymes to get through slavery. We're making art to get through, being thrown into the pits of mines in South Africa to build this country. Our culture and who we are, language mutated and expanded in order to serve the function of human survival at the worst of times. So, we are the inheritors of all of that. And I think it's also important to kind of shift perspective and realize, like, we don't have to be on the West's timeline. I mean, even for our friends and colleagues who are in the West, you don't have to be on the timeline of the kind of Western hegemonic white supremacist way of thinking, not for us as brown people, and certainly not for us as artists. And I think poetry is doing that. It's doing what it does. I see poetry, in the content that I watch on Instagram and the things that make me laugh. I hear it in songs. I see it in dialogue. I see where language is flexing and stretching its muscles to hold the abstract and to contain the uncontainable. That's where poetry is being made. And I mean, we are always in the business of that.
So it's basic alchemy is what you're saying here. Okay, just so yeah. Are there any poets that you are reading or seeing now online who are doing exciting things?
I mean,
Mbali Malimela, who you probably will see at UKZN. She's based in KwaZulu-Natal, writes in isiZulu, is doing really interesting things, almost like Siphokazi, with poetry and short film, performance, monologue, kind of blurring this line between performance, poetry, and the digital space, and doing it in an indigenous language. And in South Africa, that's such a powerful, resonant thing to do, but also incredibly challenging because of the hegemony of English. So she's from KZN, she's from Durban. So you'll probably see her. She's amazing.
Kaie, did you want to share something? An artist that you did?
Going back to also the previous question about speaking of architectures, and I think of sometimes that the poem allows for a kind of architecture of embrace, because you're able to, in the poem, reach out to other voices and include other voices in the poem. And I don't necessarily, I mean, the voices of other poets who might have lived in different times and might have written other things from what you're writing and might have had different concerns from yours. And their voices can sort of become a part of your voice as a poet. So, when I think of it, I think of sort of the aim of whether writing or performing poetry would be to not necessarily even have sort of my own voice, but to be able to access elements of what other poets have given to me, taught me, inspired in me, their concerns, their styles of writing and of delivery, and to kind of access this multivocal an architecture of multiple voices, of embrace of those voices, and of being able to sort of deploy them together at the same time in a way that's not one voice speaking, but that is sort of this kind of a multiplication of voices speaking, able to speak at the same time. So that's what I think that the poem was. One thing that the poem permits us, right? It's the space of the poem is really remarkable in that it's not bounded in a way by time or by the individual, right? So much can pass through the space of the poem that not even only the things that we intend to put in the poem wind up in the poem, right? It's also an unintentional space, a space of accident and a space of the unintended as well. And there are poets whom I like. I mean, right now there's a great poet in the UK, Anthony Joseph, who you were asking about what he's doing. He's written a couple of albums, several books, and one of his tracks that I like the most is called For Kamau. And in it, he sort of allows the voice of the poet Kamau Brathwaite to speak through his work. Yeah, fantastic poet.
Any other recommendations or any new artists that are inspiring you right now? Maybe not poets, but artists from who work in different disciplines too.
I'm quite I'm busy with children's books at the moment. So the last book I read was The Ghost Dog. Yeah, it's actually strange because I'm feeling this, and this is what happens in working in different mediums, is sometimes you feel almost out of the thing, even though the poetry holds the center for me. Is that so when I sometimes get asked this question, it's like, oh wait, I actually haven't read poetry in a while. I've been reading about the king who was afraid of the dark. I'm reading about, so I'm in a completely different world at the moment, which is really beautiful as well, because it's forcing me to ask different questions about language. When you write for a 9-year-old, very, very different. And so, yeah, there's one about a springbuck who loves reading books, and his friends are very mean to him, and they destroy his, and then a lion comes and destroys his library. Now they have to help him rebuild that library and be nice and apologize. And so I'm sort of functioning in a different world, but that fantastical space is where I am living at the moment. I'm actually enjoying it because it's stripping a lot of some things that I assumed around making meaning and clarity. Clarity is probably the biggest thing that keeps coming up, because you can't be too abstract, you can't be too vague. They have to understand what you say. Yeah, so that's where I am at the moment. I don't have names of the authors, but I actually would love to see more people read children's books. It's quite transformative for me, I'll say.
Writing for children is a wonderful experience. I did a children's production 2 years ago, a site-specific work that was staged in the inner city in Hillbrow for kids, at the Windy Brow Theatre, the historical theatre. It's over like 100 years old. One of the old 120 years old, I think that building is. But anyway, writing for kids, having to take ideas that are very abstract, like what we produce in poetry, and distill it in a way that a child can bite it and chew it and understand it. It blew me away. One, I mean, children's capacity for abstraction. Children will go there with you if the image is clear and the image is strong and it's powerful. Children will go there with you faster than adults even, and they'll hold on to it, but also kids are ruthless. If it doesn't rock, they completely disinvest. They're not interested, and they don't hide. So I mean, yeah, that beautiful dance between like simplicity and complexity. How do you convey a meaning and have it still hold true? I think if you can distill a message for kids, you can really write your ass off, because children are not they don't even try. They're not trying to be refined. They're not trying to be polite. They're not trying to protect your feelings.
So they don't buy
No,
face.
I'm curious. I want to ask you about this adaptation. Is it like, so you've taken the poetry itself and you've adapted the actual poems into children's poems, or is it an
No,
interpretation?
it's an adaptation of the story, actually, of Insomi in the book. Yes. So with the character in that becoming the protagonist, and then using a lot of the imagery from Insomi. So, for example, his sidekick is a bird called Ndengu, who in Insomi traditionally is one who can make a tree grow back. So when the child is being chased by a cannibal, he can sing and say Ndengu Ndengu Matlajana. So every time the cannibal cuts the tree, this is the original story. So every time the cannibal cuts the tree down to try and get the kids, this bird will sing, and then the cannibal catches the bird, and then I think just leaves a feather, but the feather can sing as well. So I've taken that archetype put it as her sidekick in this adventure series. And so I'm using a lot of those images that we'd recognize from Inzomi to write a more modern adaptation. It is kicking my ass, but I will get there.
The iterations that you're getting out of your book as well, like, you know, the audio, the children, I think I think that there's like a million worlds inside a poem, you know, like, so it's beautiful to see. It's like, I don't know. There's a phrase. It's almost like you canonizing yourself. It's nice. It's lekker, man. It's beautiful.
So you're media-ing yourself.
That's it.
That's,
I love
that's
that.
not as beautiful, but yeah.
Yeah. I like that versioning of the poem where it can become other things. Yeah, and speak in different ways. And what I also like about that is that it's never like the poem never reaches its final form, right? Like if it's written and published in a journal, that's not the final form that the poem has reached. It is now written on paper and published in a journal, therefore it's done. You know, it's still open, and can still change. And so the poem remains kind of dynamic and possible. It remains in the making. And alive, you know, and I like that idea. So that's very inspiring what you're doing for sure.
We need poetry to stay alive through different media because we don't necessarily come from, especially in Canada, people don't memorize poetry anymore, except for the poets. You know, in different cultures, you grow up memorizing poetry, so it becomes part of kind of your living, your how you walk in the world. But we need to be crafty, and we need to make it 3D, and we need to make it, we need to expand it. And it's beautiful to see you all doing that. Um, is that something that you would suggest to younger poets to do, like emerging poets? What kind of advice would you even give to emerging poets? Is it even possible to walk in this world as a full-time, like if someone says, what do you do in the world? Do you say poet? Like, is that a job? How do you follow it up? Do you just say poet and walk away?
Sometimes I don't say it because it just invites too many questions. And sometimes I don't want to have my life put on a petri dish. And, you know, sometimes I'll just say, oh, writer, or, oh, I'm an artist, or I work in media. It's not lies. But when you say it in the world, if you say, I am a poet, people are going to, what? What do you mean? And what do you do? And what do you write about? And more? And does anybody care? Aren't all poets dead? Are you dying? Like, I don't want to deal with all that. There's like a look of impending doom in their eyes, like, oh, whoa, catastrophe. Oh, she's about to disintegrate in a web of poverty. Oh, before our eyes. Yo,
Yeah. Yes, I do say I'm a poet. Maybe more so in certain contexts than others. But and it's also a thrill to watch the confusion in other in other people's eyes. So there's a particular thrill in that. But I certainly understand that poetry doesn't pay the bills, unless there's a kind of phenomena, an anomaly that puts the form of poetry in a readily accessible form of media that then gets extrapolated into $1 million. And we've seen it happen a few times, but though, we know it wouldn't last, and it hasn't it hasn't really stuck as a model. So poetry certainly is work, and it is a way of making a life, as Dion Brand has said. Although certainly you know, I think I always had the understanding that I was not going into art for it to pay the bills. I thought of I understood from the outset that I would need to get a job that was that was about keeping the lights on and food on the table. But poetry sustains all of that. And we've been doing it for millennia, millennia after millennia. Um, and it's not, we don't live in the time anymore where poetry was the primary mode of language for a lot of things, including legislature and medicine. And, you know, we don't live in those times anymore, right? But poetry carries on those functions nonetheless. You know, it's just not monetized. So there's a life that you make and I wouldn't choose another life. I wouldn't. You know, this is a good life. It's not a bad life at all that we have as poets.
I might also say, though, on that note, maybe shift your gaze to what is happening on the continent, where orality and poetry and the culture of memorizing poetry is a central part of identity formation, for most people, for Black people. I mean, when Siphokazi is talking about Inso me, there's so many forms of storytelling, of poetry, of literature as live art that is a part of our really day to day culture, that makes it possible for people like me and Siphokazi to be able to work. So I mean, it just depends on like what's your reference point. If your reference point is the way that poetry has always been used in the West, then yes, it's true. But I would, and the for me sometimes what is really challenging, especially being an artist living and working in Africa, is that even for us, our reference point is still the West, and even with the stuff that's happening all around us, people are still, oh, poetry is a dying art form. Where, guy, is it dying there by your grandmother? Where is it dying? So I don't know, man. Sometimes it's like the stuff that's happening right under your nose, the thing that you're immersed in. The white supremacy can really dupe you and make you not see like what's in front of you. I don't blame you because you guys are stuck out there in the wilderness of Canada, and we appreciate you. We appreciate you for being out there. But yeah, man. Orality, griots, isithakazelo direto. I mean, from East Africa to West Africa to here in the South, it's a thing.
Yeah, it's a thing here too, and we work in those traditions even on the page. We have to find a way to make it translate. And poetry is a
Absolutely.
part of our lives, but again, it's not a job. It's not like nobody wants to fund the poems, the poets, you know what I mean? It's just not here. It's not a thing you go into thinking, I'll be able to retire, you know? But yeah, that's exactly the thing that I'm saying. It's timeless, right? You can't attach it to any one place or time and say, there's a kind of job associated with making a line that sings, but it's everywhere.
Rappers have been
Yeah,
doing that for 50
yeah,
years.
absolutely.
The spoken
Yeah,
word movement. I mean, there's
all of that. Yeah,
I don't think those are anomalies. I think that's who we are.
absolutely. The anomaly is that it's not held up, as a job. I think that's my point. So in
Yeah.
spite of the fact that it isn't, a line on the tax form that, you can,
Yeah.
it
Yeah.
persists because this is who we are, and we're continuing in that language and in those modes and in that fire. So yeah, this is where we are.
The only place I've been to where I've seen cultural workers who are respected as professionals and who are treated in society, where I saw like a legendary jazz musician who was respected as much as a surgeon, is Colombia.
Yes,
Have you guys done
exactly.
Medellin? I mean, it's unbelievable the devotion that people have to poetry, and just the way that poetry and reading poetry, orality, the way that it's a part of like the lifeblood of the people, and the way that the way artists work there. Like every artist is a teacher, every artist has like 4 or 5 hustles, jobs going on. Artists are respected as artists. You know, you can stand up in a room and say, you can have 4 jobs and stand up in a room and say, I am a poet, and people are, oh, that's wonderful. Yes, okay, where will we see you reading? Oh. So
Absolutely, for Colombia.
I think also, Lebo, what you're talking about is, and I am in the same, I work in the same manner as you, where we have many jobs. But here, if you say griot, you have to define it in Canada. Then you have to like name all the 50 job titles that you have. That is normal and feels normal, but it's not normalized. It's not valued either. So yes, being multimedia is definitely a useful way of walking as a poet. Because yes, you can translate your poet into many different modes of being that can be consumed and that can pay the bills. That's how I live. If I don't have a job, I'm a poet, and it entails many jobs. I don't hustle. I just work, and money comes, and it's enough. I just keep working. It doesn't matter. The money is secondary because we just invented that. It doesn't actually exist. So, and it's just another energy, another kind of fire. So we just do the work. What I just don't ever want to forget is the privilege and the honor that I have, because I'm not the best poet. There are artists who are better than I, who don't have the opportunities or access to the resources or to even do that work. So whenever I write, I also think of that. So it's a great honor, a great privilege. I take it very seriously, even though it's not very valued in Canada outside of Indigenous communities here. When I speak to Canada, I'm speaking of the colonial level. The immigrant levels and the Indigenous levels understand what we're talking about. So yeah. So I think we are kind of almost at the end of time, and I wondered if anyone had any last words that they'd like, their final words for this group that they'd like to say or to share. I leave the floor open to you.
I'm so honored to have shared time and space with you. This has been like it's like dessert for my brain. I'm gonna chew over some of the stuff that was said here for a very, very long time. I appreciate you.
Likewise, I appreciate the questions and everyone's input and everyone's thoughts. So thank you.
Agreed. It felt like sitting around a fire. Thank you, Tanya, as well, for really, really holding and connecting some of our thinking here. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, ditto to all of that. And as always, there's gonna be a real fire somewhere, where the voices of all of us humans get to blend in with the world, and so that we can shed more and more of that main character syndrome we tend to have. So poetry is one of the ways that we learn to listen very deeply, very deeply. So this was really great listening to all of you, and to carry all of that forward. Thank you, Tanya, and everyone else.
Thank you, all of you. We've been talking today with poets from Canada, Kaie Kellough and Canisia Lubrin, and poets from South Africa, Lebo Mashile and Siphokazi Jonas. And we are here at Poetry Africa 2025 on this online program. We hope that this is the beginning of an exchange that continues between Canada and South Africa, and hopefully some kind of bridge opens so that we can get poets traveling both ways. That's what we're currently working on with Poetry Africa. So let's see how that can be sustained in the future, because that's what we're going to do, keep the fire burning, right? That's the job of the poet. So thank you to the poets, all of you, and thank you to those watching at home. Many blessings to all. Peace.